network of a minister and an ambassador. So I'm assuming a Secret Service team will come and take me out if I go over. So I'm definitely going to be on time. Um, but yeah, no, really delighted to be here again this morning. And what I want to talk about today is really the role of marine research stations and introduce you to a network that you may not be familiar with. But I've been working with Yanni and others on this. But once again, because of my role, I head up the international work at Plymouth Marine Laboratory. So it's really taking a global perspective. So what I'm going to be doing is talking a little bit, as I did yesterday, about the shared seas, what's happening at the global level, talking about marine observations at the global level, and then talking really about the whole issue of marine stations. And what I want to introduce you all to is this global network here, which is the World Association of Marine Stations. So I started off yesterday with this slide, if you remember. So this is the famous Apollo 17 shot, 1972. Became known as the blue marble because, of course, people began to realize that we call it Earth, but as Arthur C. Clarke pointed out, clearly we should be calling it ocean. You know, pretty much 3/4 of the entire planet is covered in the seas, and it is one connected ocean. That's what we're really talking about, and we all need to work together. And straight away, that's really going to be the theme of my talk: is this need that we work together at the global level to address the issues that we're facing. As I said yesterday, you'll often hear talk about the Arctic, the Atlantic, Indian Pacific, etc. But actually, there is one connected ocean. So whatever we do in one place has knock-on effects to another. Now, the reason I've showed this again is because this photo was taken in 1972, and actually they repeated this fairly recently. So 50 years later, NASA got the same photo taken. So this is the 2023 version. And what was interesting, and the reason this made such big headlines is because even from space, you could see that in 5 decades, there are huge changes that we've made to our planet. So the actual detail isn't really the issue. The issue is that if you think about it, you go up 50 years later, take a picture of this blue planet, and you can see major changes. I haven't got time to put them next to each other and go through it, but there was this nice article that Robert Paul did, um, which basically pointed out you can see the Antarctic ice sheet is reduced in size. There's a lot of reduction in vegetation in the tropics. There's increased desertification. All of these things can be seen 50 years later when they retook this picture. So the point of this is that, you know, what you can see is effect right across the globe. It's not just small local effects. We're actually having massive impacts on the planet as a whole. And of course, this is starting to be mapped now. So this was a very famous paper published in Science by Ben Halpin back in 2008. And this was the first attempt to actually look at what impacts are we having right across the globe? And he mapped from very low impacts to high impact. And this basically is the entire globe here, showing that the key story here is one, there are a few areas where there are, you know, well, there's a lot going on basically, these very high impact areas in red. But the key point of this story is to see that in terms of our oceans, there are very, very few untouched areas now. He redid this paper in 2015 where he looked at cumulative impacts as well. And it was pretty much the same story. The story being that there are very few areas of our ocean that aren't seeing some sort of impact from human pressure. And what is more worrying, and this paper came out earlier in the year in Nature, so this was in spring of this year. This was a paper that actually told an even more concerning story. So this was based on a lot of data that's available from all sorts of sources. But what this paper did here is it used satellite mapping and showed that actually we're not even capturing most of what is going on in our ocean. So if you look over here, if you look at industrial fishing, you have the publicly tracked and publicly available information on the fishing impact. But actually, and these figures to me are astonishing. 72 to 76% of the world's industrial fishing vessels are not publicly tracked. So these are things that are happening. They're being picked up on satellites, but this isn't being picked up in the sort of data that is being used for assessments. And the same thing with transport. 21 to 30% of transport and energy vessel activity is missing from public tracking systems. So what this paper did is it basically said that we think we've got a handle on the sort of pressures that are going on in our ocean, but actually we haven't. If you actually look at things like Global Fishing Watch, Traffic Watch, and a lot of these NGOs now who've set up their own tracking, they're actually saying there's a lot more going in our oceans than we actually know in terms of public awareness. So it's the same story. We're having this huge footprint, this global footprint right across the ocean. And it was interesting to hear about the oil spill earlier. I mean, that's an oil spill that everybody knew about. There was a professional policy response and a scientific response. But actually, there was an article in the UK Times yesterday saying that a lot of what's happening at the moment in terms of oil, these legal ship-to-ship transfers that are happening, where they're transferring oil from one ship to another in areas where they're not tracked. They turn their transponders off, and you get in these huge oil slicks that once again nobody knows about. And we have scientists working at PML developing Earth observation techniques to pick up these oil slicks because you wouldn't know about them if you didn't have satellites looking down. So this is really the story of this is the kind of the background, if you like, the context of where we are globally. We're having a wide footprint across the entire globe. So what are we doing about tracking all of this? Well, as I said, there's a lot being done in satellites and Earth observations. And I don't want to go into loads of detail, but this is really showing that we do have systems from local to regional to global where we're trying to actually find out what is happening in our seas. So the focus this week is very much on the sort of local and national networks. So these are the MECN boys that Yanni and others have been talking about this week. This is the Western Channel Observatory in Plymouth that Steve talked about yesterday. So at the sort of the local national level, we're trying to put in all of these marine monitoring systems so that we can actually find out what's going in the local area. I haven't got time to talk about what we're doing regionally, but if you look at the global networks, what you see what you see here is there's really more of an attempt to bring together all of these monitoring networks on a global scale so we can understand what's happening. So these are some of the institutes involved in monitoring the deep sea and the deep ocean. So you can see here that there's various research cruisers and various organizations that are out there mapping the ocean, and we're trying to find out what our footprint is. This is a whole new area. We're now having a footprint on the deepest part of the ocean, which would have been unheard of or unthought about 50 years ago. So we have some major projects that are looking at that. I mentioned yesterday the Argo floats. So you've got about 2,000, no, I think it's about up to about 3,000, isn't it now? Floats all around the ocean. Really important for understanding our climate, understanding what's happening with our weather, climate change, and other things. I mean, here's another example. And this is really nice because this is a global observing system for seagrass. So years ago, somebody looking at seagrass might have just said, well, I go off and I'm in Singapore, I go and see where the seagrass is and I'll map it and I'll look at its health. But actually, what people are doing now is they're integrating it into these big global systems. And that really helps you understand what's going on because one of the key things is when something changes locally, there are two reasons that might happen. One is because of what's happening locally. So it might be local pollution, it might be local damage from anchors or something like that. But also, it might be a global effect. It might be because the temperature is changing across the globe. It might be climate change. And if we're going to separate out those signals between what is happening locally and what is happening globally, then we need to start understanding and bringing all these observations together. And once again, you've got another example is the global sea level observing system. So once again, what we're trying to do is get a handle on what is happening right across the globe with these monitoring systems. Right, this is where it gets quite messy again. I always end up on one of these complicated slides. So in theory, what we need is a body that oversees all of this and knows what we're monitoring where and brings it all together and integrates it very nicely. And the what we do actually have under the UN is the Global Ocean Observing System, GOOSE, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. And what GOOSE does is it has these regional groupings where you can find out what's being monitored. And I think Steve was saying that my favorite acronym here is Mongoose, which is great for the Mediterranean one. But you have all these regional groupings. But you can see here that what Goose is trying to do is map what we're doing right around the globe and somehow bring all of that together. So you've got the profiling floats, data buoys, you've got in situ time series, sea level, some of the stuff that I've already mentioned, ship-based measurements. And in 2024 alone, Goose have added fishing vessel observing networks, CO2 observing network, a science monitoring subsea cables network. So they're trying to bring all this together so we know what is actually being monitored and how we're understanding this impact we're having on the ocean. There is some criticism of Goose in the sense that well, it's very difficult. It's a very ambitious and challenging thing to do to map all this, but also it's very largely focused on the physical side of things rather than the biological, although there are biological elements in it. And the paper that pulled this figure together also did this sort of illustration, and there's going to be a question coming up, so just have a look at this. And basically it starts to look at all those. So if you think about the figure I've just shown you with all those dots, this is what they represent. It represents all different sort of research vessels. It represents weather stations, drifting buoys, like the Argo floats. You've got all this sort of technology, which Steve talked about yesterday in his talk. You've got autonomous underwater vehicles. So you've got a huge range of technology that is now being deployed worldwide so we can understand what's going in our ocean. Right, so here's a question. Is there anything missing from this picture? I'm not expecting anybody to know, but right, okay, I'll tell you what's missing. And this happens all the time when you see what capacity we have for measuring and looking at the ocean as a whole. Um, what's missing is this, marine stations. If you look on here, they've got automatic weather stations, meteorological stations, automated gauges. There's all sorts of things here. There isn't St. John's Island Marine Station would not fit into this because they don't have marine stations on this picture. I took this off the NASA website, the NOAA website, years ago, and it still hasn't changed. You can find these diagrams everywhere, and they all say this is what we need to monitor the ocean. So I actually added this myself. So when I give a talk, I always have this, and then I put a marine station there. And the marine stations are really important because what these marine stations do, like St. John's Island and others, is for a start, they're the gateway to the public. So the public generally don't know anything about this, and it's not accessible to the public. The public can't go out and just visit a research vessel or drive out to a buoy to see what's happening or any of this stuff. This stuff largely is unseen. Whereas, and I'll talk about this more in a moment, the marine stations provide this link between the land and the public and actually our understanding of the ocean as a whole. I'll talk about all of these in a minute, but also biodiversity monitoring. So a lot of what we know about the local biodiversity, what's going on in, where most of us live and work is done by these marine stations. Capacity building. So this is where a lot of the people are involved in. So a lot of this data, it's great that we collect it all, but where's all this data analyzed? Who are the people writing up this data and understanding what it means? They're the people in St. John's and other marine stations. And they interpret and analyze this data. And of course, these are also the people that are talking to ambassadors and ministers and other people who need to hear this information. So I just go back quickly. Whenever you see one of these big pictures of what's important in terms of understanding our ocean, please remember to add a marine station in your head or like I've done like that. Always add the marine station because it's amazing. In fact, a friend of mine, Nando Buero in Naples, he's actually commissioned somebody to do. He's commissioned somebody to do one of these, with a marine station on it. And I think he's going to send it over to NOAA and some others and say, look, please use this. Um, so that's the thing that's often missing when we talk about marine stations. So why are they important? And this is really what I want to focus on for the rest of the talk. Well, this was a map that was done for the Global Ocean Science Report in 2020. And you can see here that this map, at the time, there were 784 marine stations that we mapped worldwide. And I go into a bit of the history of these in a moment. So this is an enormous area of capacity that is being completely overlooked by, so when people look, when Goose and others look at how we're monitoring our ocean, they've completely overlooked the fact that we've got hundreds of these marine stations that are really well connected, and they're scattered right across the globe. And if you go onto the WAM's website, we've got an atlas where we're updating these at the moment, and we're up to, I think it's more than that now. We're up to about 835 marine stations that we've tracked at the moment, and they're being added all the time, either because we don't know about them or because somebody's building new ones. So this capacity has been, as I said, really kind of ignored in terms of the important work they do. So let's talk a little about marine stations, what they are and where they came from. So there's a lot of argument over what the first marine station was, but most people, nearly everybody, is agreed that the very first one was in 1843 in Ostend in Belgium. The world's first marine station is pretty much definitely that one. Occasionally you'll see this one, Concarneau, listed. The reason being is that one kind of, it came and then it got knocked down and rebuilt and all the rest of it. That one just set up in 1859 and is still there. But then you've got Woods Hole in 1888. But really, from the mid to the end of the 19th century, you had all of these marine stations being built. Rather embarrassingly, this one in Plymouth has got the wrong date on. You think being from Plymouth, yeah, that would be right, but that should be 1884, not 1871. I was just trying to make it look older, So, um, but what's interesting is, WAMS isn't the first organisation to say, actually, aren't these things really important? We should be mapping them. So in 1910, this guy, Charles Atwood Kofoid, he actually, from the US, decided to map all of the stations in Europe. And I've got a copy of this atlas, and you can read, and it shows you where all the different marine stations are in Europe. And then this guy, Bob Hyatt, in 63, he did something, he went one better, and he decided to map all of the hydrobiological and fisheries institutes, which included most of these at the time, excuse me, in 1963. Honestly, if you ever get a good job, that is the best job in the world. From what I can work out, somebody just said, go around the entire globe, take photos of every marine station you see, write a little bit about it, and come back when you're finished. Honestly, I want that job. I won't, and unfortunately, we can update it now online because I did volunteer to go around the world. But hey, so anyway, you can look at this, and it's really interesting because the point is that both of these thought actually these marine stations are really important, and we should be mapping them and develop some sort of atlas. In this case, a book of where they all are. Now, how many are there? As I said, we've got about 834 in the atlas. I'm not expecting to read all this. I know this is a horrible slide. One of the issues we've got is the definition of a marine station. What is a marine station? So many years ago, it was easy. It was a building always next to the sea with people in it and some kit and some facilities. But as things have changed, um, so I'll give you an example. I won't say which country. I asked one country, how many marine stations have you got? And the first response I got was nearly 500. I thought, that's incredible. And then they sent me the pictures, but they'd got marine stations as sensors on the end of pontoons, as litter, and a collection of buoys, maybe with one person who would be looking after them. And I was like, well, that's not really a marine station. That's a bit of monitoring kit. So that's not actually a marine station. But then we had people challenge us. So for instance, I was in India earlier the year in Hyderabad, and I was sat in this room looking at this screen, and it was showing me everything that was going on in the sea. It was collecting data. It was just a fantastic picture of what was going on. Hyderabad is about 300 kilometers plus from the nearest sea. So you've now got what's technically a marine station in the middle of the land, nowhere near the sea. So this is why I'm saying it's getting a little more tricky now to work out what a marine station is. But and there are a number of people here. I've put some. I think you'll be sent these slides. There are a number of publications here where people have tried to say actually what a marine station is or what it should be, and then list the different elements. But I think most of us agree that a marine station usually involves some sort of building, some people in it, some connection to the ocean, and we're coming up with the best definition we can. In fact, the Global Ocean Science Report, to go back to this again, and I have to thank one of my colleagues I work with very closely in Japan, Kazuo Inaba. He did a lot of work on this initial thinking on what a marine station was. And this is the definition from this report. Marine field stations and laboratories provide access to environments. Facilities are valuable platforms that support research and provide opportunities for outreach. There's undergraduate training, citizen science, and many marine research institutes support long-term observational studies. So it doesn't have to cover all of those, but I think most of us, if I said, right, tell me what a marine research institute is, would probably come up with some sort of definition that this is the sort of things they do. And I think what's important also in terms of in the marine stations is, as I said, this link to the public. So one of the interesting things about the marine stations is that many of them actually started off as aquariums. In fact, some of them still are aquariums. So I work quite a lot with this Anton Dawn Marine Station in Naples. I was there last year for the 150th anniversary of this marine station. So we were talking yesterday, there were quite a few people saying, our station is quite old, it's 50 years, it's whatever. I mean, honestly, a lot of these stations I visit, they're at their 150th anniversary mark, so they've been around a long time. But a lot of them are aquariums as well. So this is a map of aquariums across Europe and the UK, and we won't do it now, but most of these coastal ones map onto the marine stations that actually exist. Here's another one that I've worked in as well, which is out in Crete. And most of them are the same thing. They bring the public in to the aquariums, but actually behind the scenes, there's all of this research going on. And there's a nice article here on the historical connection between early marine science research and then this aquarium from Portugal. So it's really, this is so important because, as I said, the marine stations, unlike research vessels and buoys and satellites and that, they really bring the public in to understand what's going on in our ocean. So this idea that we somehow have to bring all these marine stations together and work together resulted in the idea for this World Association of Marine Stations. So in 2010, a number of organizations came together, including this, which was the European Network of Marine Stations, which I took over in 2017. That's my favorite ever job title I ever had. I was president of Mars. I used to email people and they would just say that is the coolest stroke weirdest job title I've ever seen. President of Mars, but I'm not anymore. But there we go. So Mars, which is the European Marine Network, and POGO and a few others, lots of acronyms. I won't do them now. With IEC UNESCO met in 2010. And they said, "Look, we want to bring all these marine stations together. It's really important if we're going to understand our ocean at the global level." They presented it at the IOC, and in 2011, it was adopted by the IOC Assembly. Unfortunately, what happened next was nothing. Nothing happened. There was no money. There was nobody really knew what to do about it. It was a great idea. It had been formally adopted. So when I took over this, I went to see the IC UNESCO in Paris and basically said, well, I've been given these documents to say what I've got to do. And apparently there's this thing called WAMS. So they explained to me that it was all agreed, but there was no real money to do anything. So I said, well, what do you think of it as an idea? And they said, it's absolutely vital. WAMS must be up and running. It's really important. So I said, great, I'll take it on. Let's see what we can do. And I got back in touch with Kazuo and various others and got back in touch with Pogo and said, right, let's get this up and running again. So that was back in 2018. And then we had a development phase, and then we formally launched WAMS at the World Congress of Marine Stations in 2021. Um, Unfortunately, it was COVID. It was supposed to be actually in Moscow, funnily enough, that year, but it ended up being online. But we had about 350 people from around the world attended this over 3 days. Um, and you can see here we had speakers from IOC Africa, we had speakers from China and various countries. And it was amazing because people would turn up and say, right, I'm going to talk about what's going on in Belize or in China or something. And then they would talk about all these different marine stations. And a lot of people online said, I didn't even know they were there. You know, you're hearing about marine stations in Albania and places that nobody had heard of. So that's the point of WAMS. It connects everybody. And all of a sudden, everybody starts talking about, okay, well, how can we work together? So that was when it was formally relaunched rather than launched. Um, you can go online to see all of this, but our mission statement basically is we want to be a global network, create opportunities for collaboration, to do capacity building. We want our members to have this unique network so they can meet and exchange information. I won't read all of this. What it really says is we want to bring everybody together so we can collaborate. Now, this is really important because this is why this is really the purpose. If I'll go back one, so I think I've given away my next answer to my next question, but um, this is why they're called marine stations. I mean, marine stations. Have you ever thought about why we use that term? Does anybody want to know? Anybody just read the slide or no? You know anyway. Why do we call them the marine stations? It's because the first people who set up the marine stations, so Anton Dorn, as I said, that was the guy 150-year anniversary. In 1868, he was working with this chap who I can't pronounce his name, so I won't say it. Um, but he had this plan to cover the globe with a network of zoological research stations, and he called them stations because they were analogous to railway stations. So in his mind, a marine station was never supposed to operate independently in isolation. The whole point is you went to a station, you worked with some people, you learned some techniques, you told them what you know, and then you'd go along, like getting on a train and go to the next station and think, okay, well, let's work with this group here. So it was the name Marine Station, implicit in that name is the idea that you are connected, that you will work with other marine stations, just like getting on a train and going from station to station. So that's really why, where that came from. And this is the main idea of WAMS, is to foster collaboration and achieve synergy through capacity sharing and networks. So how do we do this? Well, as I said, we've got this atlas and we've got members from all the different marine stations, but there are also these regional groupings here. So we're trying as much as we can to bring things like, so the North American Marine Laboratory Network, which is the one for the US. I've put MECN here because obviously I'm coming to this meeting. So MECN is on there now. You've got Jambio, which is the Japanese Association of Marine Stations, Tropical Marine Network in Australia. There are quite a lot of these where people are trying to bring together their marine stations at a national or regional or local level. I just think yesterday, by the way, what a fantastic set of talks. And Yanni and I were talking yesterday. You have to bring all this together. Honestly, it's just, you think about each of those individually, what is going on in Thailand and Malaysia and Indonesia and all the places we heard about yesterday. Think about the power of bringing all that together and working together and having these meta-analyses and all those expert sharing. That's what WAMS is about. It's just, as I said, it's an exciting way to work rather than working in isolation. And we also, as I said, work with, so they're the regional networks, or that I've put Jambi on there because this is an example of the national network. So as I said, this is Kazuo, who's been doing a lot of this in Japan. And you can see here that these are all the different marine stations in Japan. And every year they all come together, all the marine stations. So I've been to a couple of these meetings, and they just all they share what they're doing. They talk about how they can work, collaborate. They talk about best practice in terms of funding. They talk about challenges, where they can share staff and expertise. So it's a simple way of just getting together once a year and sharing under this national banner. And I'm hoping to update this, but here's an example going back to Anton Dorn of why it's good that we work together. So this is Jay-Z Young, and in the 30s he was working at the Anton Dorn station out in Naples, and he came across these cephalopods, these squid, and he thought, "Oh, these are amazing! I didn't really know much about these." So he started studying them, and then he then moved to the Marine Biological Association in Plymouth. That was his next role. And while he was there, somebody said, "Yeah, yeah, we know about these cephalopods. Let's do some research on them." And he discovered this giant axon, this nerve fiber. So it was a really huge nerve fiber that he realized was great to work on because it wasn't tiny like a lot of organisms. So it could help you understand basically how things worked in terms of nervous potential and all the rest of it. Um, he then went out to Woods Hole in Massachusetts in 36. You can see here the dates where this guy's moving around. But at all of these points, it's not him, by the way. He's working with all these different experts, and each of them saying, "Oh, yeah, but did you know this? Oh, did you know that? Oh, we've got." So this was all about clamp technology that was being developed in Plymouth. This was about work that was going in Woods Hole, and he published this paper, The Function of the Giant Nerve Fibers of the Squid. Um, and then it goes back to Plymouth because these guys, who are actually based at Cambridge University, Hodgkin and Huxley, they suddenly realized, hang on a minute, we can understand how the basics of nervous potential and nervous reaction and a whole nervous system works. So they published on how the nervous system works and they won a Nobel Prize. So the point of this, and I do want an updated version of this, I don't know how I'm going to get it, but I need one, is that this is involving, and I've skipped some, there were some Japanese stations involved, I just couldn't fit it all in. So this guy and various others were all moving around the world talking to each other. And because they were all working together and coming across different things going on, it ended up with a Nobel Prize. And I've got a friend of mine who's a very senior psychiatrist. He knows this story because he said the whole basis of modern neurophysiology, what we understand about how the brain works, comes from this work here. That's exciting. That's what happens when you get marine people in marine stations working together. So the other reason we want to have uh, an association of marine stations is because, and this is where it gets a bit sad, but something that you'll all know, is marine field stations the world over are in jeopardy, which was reported in 2014. It's really, I won't go into the details, but I hear every month or so a marine station has closed down somewhere. There's no money to run it. The university's closed it down. They can't afford to keep it going. You lose often decades, sometimes more of information. It all just disappears. And it's because people don't see them as part of that global network of monitoring like they do for the Argo floats. They just think, oh, well, we don't know what that building does. We see people wandering over there in lab coats and going out in a boat occasionally. It's really expensive. We'll close it down. So what we're trying to say is you're missing the big picture. These are really important facilities that you need to keep going and you need to fund. The other thing is to train the next generation. So one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to set up processes where people can move around different marine stations. So I had a meeting with a guy in the Maldives the other day, and he said, "We've actually got accommodation, we've got bursaries for people to come and work with us." He said, "But not everybody knows about it." And I said, "Well, we'd love to put it on our website so that if somebody wants to go and work out in that bit of the ocean, they can say, oh, right, there's this place here. I can go and stay there. They've got accommodation." So we're trying to facilitate that as well. Um, and as I said, basically, you can go on and see these stations in the updated atlas and find out where they are. If there's well, down the line, you'll be able to find out if there's money available, but you at least get the contact details. And then the other thing that we want to do is talk about the research gaps. Yep, I need to start wrapping up. So, one of the important things about these marine stations is they actually mapped a lot of the biodiversity. So, what we know about a lot of the coast of France, across the Mediterranean and other areas in the Western Atlantic, it was because a lot of these marine stations, the first things they did is they looked out the window and said, "Let's go and map it. Let's see what's going on." And as you know, a lot of the marine stations, that's what people are doing. They're mapping what's going outside. These are fantastic baselines as well. So we published quite a lot of papers based on the fact that we know what was going on 100 years ago, and we know what's changed now, so that we can go back and see what's changed in terms of biodiversity. And then finally, just to finish off, because I'm coming to the end now. Sorry, my slides have gone really weird here. Let me just see if yeah. So finally, mechanism science diplomacy. Honestly, the world has gone crazy the last year or two. I mean, in terms of geopolitics, honestly, I can't believe the change. Countries that I could work with 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I can't work with anymore. We're having all sorts of issues. What is great about this is we're working with people literally in most countries in the world, and we might have to meet online and that, but it's a great mechanism just to say, you know what, the world may have gone crazy, but as scientists, we can work together. We can do good stuff together. Let's do it through an association like this. So that's the end of my talk on what the World Association of Marine Science, what Association of Marine Stations is doing. If any of you want to register for this, there's still time. We're holding the second World Congress of Marine Stations in Japan at the end of November. We're bringing as many people together to talk about how we take this to the next stage, because I hope I've convinced you that marine stations aren't just these small buildings stuck out on an island in the middle of nowhere doing their own thing, but they're actually part of an incredible worldwide resource, and that if we work together, we can do pretty amazing things. So thank you.
Thank you so much again, Professor Cross, for your very insightful sharing. I think we can now move into the Q&A segment. For in-person participants, please feel free to use the microphones located along the walkway. Maybe Prof. I could pass you.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Yep. Right.
Oh, great. Well, with yesterday's slide with a lot of treaties that have been the outcomes, and it's extremely impressive. And my question is not, because it is very important that that happens. But what happens in terms of the enforcement of treaties? Because a lot of countries, I'll say because I lived in North America, are very litigious. I saw it. But it's like the grandmas in Switzerland who are enforcing like climate change legislation, right? How, because we're relying on these groups, is it just going to come from well-off countries like Switzerland? Or do we have public funding for people to be able to push the agenda, like for children, to say, you're taking away my right to a clean environment?
Yeah. So
Sorry, Professor, can I trouble you to repeat the question?
right. Okay. So really, the question is. So I talked earlier about what's happening globally, and yesterday I talked about a lot of the treaties, international treaties that were set up to deal with that, and international law. And the question is, can that be enforced? Essentially, um, in one it really does. So in one sense, I used a phrase yesterday that said international ambition can only be realized through national action. And I think that's really important, because international law and international treaties, in some ways, they're just promises to do things. And a lot of how people respond to that is to do with the reputation. Does a country want to be seen as a global player and doing the right thing on the global stage? And of course, some countries don't recognize these things. They don't ratify the treaties, they don't recognize the courts. So, really, if we want stuff done, it comes down to this level. So, it's at the national level where governments put in the right legislation, the right laws, because that's where your enforcement comes. If it's illegal to go and pollute to dump certain things in your local bay, if that's in national law, then that can be enforced. But actually, at the international level, where they're talking about pollution globally, that's just kind of a general commitment. And I would say, in terms of the marine station's role in this as well, to bring it back to that, um, like at Plymouth Marine Lab where I work, we make a lot of effort to get our scientists to the COPs and to these venues and on these panels and meeting people at the highest level, because then we're hammering home these messages, something needs to be done. And what we want is that to trickle back down to the local, the regional, but most importantly, the national level where laws are put in place. So it's
Developed countries with lots of money, but yet the many people who are going to suffer from climate change are in countries where, grandmas aren't going to have the this for like peace, right? And so we've got this great disparity where the laws apply to rich countries, but they don't apply where we need them, right?
Um, I agree. I mean, what I'll do is I'll say it's probably to talk offline because it's a really complicated situation, to be totally honest, in terms of enforcement in laws. And I know a lot of the treaties. So this year for the COP, for example, for the UNFCCC convention, they're making a lot of effort to bring in developing countries and widen the participation from, so it's not just the US and Europe, to get more voices in that. It's not quite what you're talking about in terms of actually bringing litigation, but yeah, it's probably too complicated for me to give a 30-second response now. So
Yeah. So where it could really change is where Canada changes its mining practices in Central America and dumping plastics in Southeast Asia, but there's not the willingness to actually have laws that govern these developed countries are doing in the places that are dealing with these problems.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'll pick it up with you in coffee break. Seriously, it's a really good question, but a very complicated answer. Yep.
Since a lot of data is collected by energy infrastructure, such as wind farms, oil and gas, can you convince these asset owners to make them marine stations as well?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I doubt it, to be honest. I don't. But what we could do is, and actually a lot of people are doing this, is work much better with those sectors. So, for instance, we're actually running quite a few projects. I've used Plymouth Marine Laboratories just because I know about it, but we've got projects in the pipeline, the ones we've already done, where we're working with the offshore sector to make sure that the way they do things in the environment. So I don't see what's coming there, but the way we use their data and all of that is actually coming back and supported by marine stations. So it's more about making links to those sectors than defining them as marine stations. But I think Steve would like to come in here because um,
And I'm going to take the opportunity to list it. Let's do that. If national bodies and governments, when licensing such an industrial activity, made it a mandatory part of that activity to actually provide those data for the good of public activities, I think we have a long step forward. There are far too many valuable marine data hidden behind sort of commercial interests. And if you look at the case of Norway with the oil and gas industry, actually the data provided by the Norwegian oil and gas industry has been hugely beneficial in advancing marine science because they were obligated to take those data and also to share them.
absolutely, no, it's a really good point. Michelle, do you want to question? Right, okay.
Yeah, not an answer.
Yeah, go on, no, Claire.
I thought that your slide about all the integrated monitoring and input in the marine station, I mean, valuable, and I haven't really thought about that myself. I think, well, I wonder what your thoughts are. Is that possibly why we constantly say that new technology are sort of incredibly wonderful things that are cost less money because we're actually not valuing what needs to happen to get that data into a more sensible place?
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right, and it's a really subtle message. So once again, when we talk to government and we talk to DEFRA a lot, um, we're saying we want to develop new technology. We're developing new technology. A lot of that technology that you see out in the ocean is being developed though in the marine stations. So it always goes back to the marine stations, and that's what we're trying to push because otherwise, from the outside, if you don't understand that, you've got this big building, this facility, as I said, lots of staff, it's costing a fortune. Oh, look at that bit of kit. That just sails around the ocean and takes pictures by itself. But but the people who've made that kit, the people who maintain that kit, who understand the data, and they're in the marine station. So the reason I put that there is it is that connection. But yeah, exactly, and it's a really good point, and we have to hammer that home with governments. Otherwise, they'd think, oh, we'll just close the marine stations and drop these little things in the ocean. It won't work that way. Hang around, yeah.
No, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm going to start before the Secret Service come in. Oh yeah, yeah. I think we have to allow them to ask questions.
Is this Oscar Maldives?
Yeah, yeah.
What about the link technique adaptation? I have two directions. One, is there any effort going on to try to harmonize or standardize some of the kinds of data that's being collected in different marine stations, number one?
Yep.
Because we all have different parameters and
Yeah,
we all have
yeah.
data to be incorporated. So for a second, what are the efforts to harness global data? That means
Yeah.
data in all the marine institutes, not just regionally but globally, so that are there any IOs, international organizations, or
Yeah.
major institutes of higher learning that are really crunching the data longitudinally
Yes.
to draw some big trends? Now with machine learning and AI, you
Yes.
can put a lot of the data historically to some use
Yep.
to help, say, global scientists come up with better projections,
Yes.
the impact of climate change on biodiversity, sea level, and so on.
Yep. 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 Yeah. Good excellent questions there. So the first one, in terms of standardizing the data, the answer is yes. There has been a lot of effort in this. So my first role, in fact, I've gone from the national to the European to the global thing here. My first role was running a national network of marine stations and people who do observatories. And Yanni and I were talking about this last night. One of the first things we did is we ran a calibration and standardization workshop. So we got everybody together and we said, well, if we're all measuring sea surface temperature, if we're all taking benthic samples and measuring the seabed and sea life, if we're all doing these measurements, let's do them in the same way. It makes sense because then we can compare. So we actually brought technicians and people who worked in the, with the data and statisticians together. We standardized what we did, and then we were able to publish some really nice papers showing trends across the UK. And we could also, and this is really important, because we had audit trails of how things have been measured, not just spatially, but over time, we could back calibrate because how you measure nutrients, for example, in the 1930s is different to how you measure it in the 2000s. But because we had an audit trail, we could go all the way back and standardize the data in time as well as in space. Another example in this is we had the old nets that we used to catch fish from the late 1800s, and we had the old nets that we not the old grab samples that took the seabed. We were able to then look at what we use now and back calibrate again. So yeah, we did all that standardization. We published some nice papers. We then repeated that at the European level. So we had about 15 research stations. We standardized the way we did everything and we published a whole load of papers on trends. Once you get to the global level, you're right. The sort of the crown jewels, if you like, would be to start standardizing the way we collect things and standardize the way we analyze things. And I know there are projects doing that. Somebody here might know something I don't, but I don't. There's not one thing that's doing it, but there are some really high profile projects that are doing exactly that, trying to bring that data together to standardize it and then do trends at a global level. And you do get reports now, these world ocean assessments and various other big global reports that are trying to bring all that together. I'm
The data people community
yes, that's right. For the
a month ago
I
to
can't,
start this process.
yeah, I can't remember. So it is happening, and it's exactly where we want to get to. Yeah, so really good point. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And by the way, I'm up for a trip to the Maldives if you guys are.
Minister for that question.
That's great.
By someone's race, Peter, while we invite minister to first take the lead,